What is up, guys? Thank you once again for returning to the channel. I am, of course, Centurion1307, and of course, the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal is getting even messier as every day goes by. And this time, some developers from around 6 third-party developers were brought into the mix by the CMA for some interviews, and they had some really choice things to say. A little bit of good, a little bit of bad, and some really ugly stuff. And everybody on their channels is covering a lot of the legality side of stuff, and I wanted to cover the more human side, the things that the developers are talking about that isn't all this legal jargon. And some of it was aimed pretty harshly at Sony. But before we dig into on how they really picked apart how Sony treats them, they wanted to come out and talk about Microsoft. And a lot of them in the interviews talked about how that Microsoft has actually been quite fair with them, and a lot of them even use the word trustworthy. The one developer, though, that wanted to share their name, which was 4J, they had no problem sharing their name, where the other ones wanted to remain anonymous because Sony is actually a very big bully in the industry, and if you speak out against them, they can actually make your lives very hard or even financially bankrupt you. So a lot of them wanted to remain anonymous because Sony is not known to play nice. But with Microsoft, they wanted everybody to know that, like the developer 4J, they talked about how Microsoft has honored every element of agreements that they've inherited when they purchased Mojang, the developer of Minecraft. And they even talked about how during one of the phases of Microsoft's ownership, they had never been under any pressure to favor Microsoft-owned platforms, which means that Sony's argument about how the games are Call of Duty is going to be bugged and that Microsoft is going to favor their platform over someone else's, it kind of goes out the window, because Microsoft has been not only supporting Minecraft, but they have not been forcing the developer to favor the Microsoft platform. They even made a comment that Microsoft actually asked them to develop unique content such as the Mario mashup pack for Nintendo formats. So this means that Microsoft wanted them to create other content that would be on other platforms to support those platforms. And other developers wanted to go out and basically say, when it comes to Call of Duty, that they can't really consider one game as a must-have. That a lot of the developers believe that consumers' tastes and preferences in the video game industry, their choices for the games they play, is very broad, and not one title is basically a standalone title that sets some kind of precedence in the industry. Another developer wanted to come out and talk about how, let's face it, that there's other people out there wanting to buy Activision, and one of the developers wanted to point out that Tencent is in the background, and they feel that Tencent has a very unfair advantage in the market currently because over in the eastern part of the world, in China, basically Tencent has no way of pushing games because there's a severe lockdown in that economy for gaming, a lot of restrictions, and so a lot of these Eastern companies are allowed to push very hard in a Western economy, and they don't want to see these Eastern developers, specifically Tencent, being able to acquire Activision. And they even strike the question, would the UK consumers be better served if if Activision was acquired by Tencent? So I think that statement is very interesting, considering, you know, what if this deal doesn't go through for Microsoft and, you know, PlayStation's over here like, we won, and then somebody comes in and buys them and just completely flips the script on both of these companies. You know, in my opinion, Sony doesn't want to play with that kind of fire. But that's where another developer out of the 6 also wrote a letter stating that they feel that the arguments that are being made against the acquisition are slightly exaggerated and out of proportion, and they don't want to create problems or point fingers at anyone's struggle, but they want to create and maintain a good culture for employees, especially with how gaming is changing. They talk about how we are worried that the actual real competition and more innovation of consumer-friendly initiatives could be potentially hindered by blocking this acquisition by potential market leaders and competitors who might not be ready, PlayStation, or might be in a different strategy or just not compelled to change the status quo on the market. Total dig at PlayStation, in my opinion, on that one, as they are the market leader, and PlayStation has always tried to control the status quo or the direction of the gaming industry and the markets that surround it. And, you know, I think it's funny that this developer pointed out that Sony's not ready for that, and they feel that by blocking this, a lot of innovation could be hindered and a lot of great positive things that could be brought into gaming culture for both the employees and consumers alike will be halted. And this is the other dirty part about this whole thing. It's just something that is coming back to bite Sony in the ass once again. It was first talked about in 2020 by Mike Rose, one of the publishers of Descenders. He came out and was very adamant about how PlayStation is not very friendly when it comes to helping independent developers get their games out in the consumer spotlight so they can be purchased on the stores and interacted with and played. And he showed how hard it was in a tweet to actually find his game that had just come out on the PlayStation Store. And then a year later in June, another developer came out and he pointed out that, again, PlayStation is very harsh towards independent developers. They actually do not make it very easy for these developers to spotlight their games. He even gave a little bit of a list. So before you launch on Platform X, you need to develop the game for Platform X, get through the incredibly difficult lot check spread over 3 generations of backend software, submit a Platform X specific trailer, write a Platform X blog. And they even mention that these blog posts are not as effective as PlayStation tries to make them out to be. And then they got to submit multiple forms for social media. They got to put in a lot of work. And if they don't want to put in this kind of work, they got to pay $25,000. And even in a Kotaku article, they talk about how that sometimes these fees can go as high as $200,000 to basically get your game into the consumer spotlight on the stores. And this is where in one of the letters to the CMA, one of the developers decided to come out and talk about how they have found that their sales, because of a lot of Sony's treatment of independent developers, have been stagnating over on the PlayStation platform. They aren't getting the spotlight that they need. They have made all these convoluted systems that totally hinder an independent developer from being able to get their game to be a popular title. They have to be invited to even discount their game or participate in sales. And they are starting to notice that their sales are starting to dwindle on the PlayStation side, where over on the Xbox, games are starting to sell more on the Xbox. They're making more money on the Xbox platform. And this was brought to the spotlight by the publisher over at Descenders when he put his game in Game Pass, and he had an absolute massive amount of success. And he even has stated that he wants to put almost every game he launches in the future in Game Pass because of how successful it made his games. And they even talked more about how Xbox has made it very easy for independent developers to get more spotlight on their game, more organic results by consumers finding the games in certain sections on the store that are meant to highlight independent titles or games at a certain price point. There's even Game Pass. It's easier to get their games to participate in sales. It's even easier to deal with Microsoft and get their games to be spotlighted and advertised a little bit more on the store. Xbox has been absolutely consumer friendly, and from what it looks like in a lot of the statements made to the CMA, they are also very developer and publisher friendly. And this is where I have always said during this whole process with PlayStation opening their mouth during the ABK deal that they are completely giving themselves a bad name, and they are doubling it down even more by showing that they really are trying to be not a market participant, but a market dominating bully. And they are trying to somehow PlayStation is the platform of blockbusters, and they completely shunt independent and AA developers to the side. And I think these developers are really had enough of what Sony has done. They are ready to have the industry change. They want not only more pro-consumer services for the consumers, but they also want more competition in the market, and they want to feel like their products are not going to be stagnated for some AAA blockbuster that might not even work out. Like, how much money did PlayStation sink into Forspoken just for it to turn out the way that it did? Hey, if you enjoyed the content, please subscribe. I enjoy talking about this ABK deal. I have gotten a little bit of a backlash from some people that I do respect out there, where they feel that I shouldn't be covering it as much as I do, but I'm enjoying it. So please, again, be sure to subscribe if you want to see more content on the deal. And also be sure to check out my channel. The end screen here is going to show you a video that you might check out on the more of the ABK deal. And until next time we meet again, my friends, please stay safe out there, and thank you for watching.